Nearly 100 years ago, they were the most advanced flying machines of their time. The United States Navy's vision of airborne supremacy. Massive flying aircraft carriers. Over 700 feet long, made of aluminum and helium, and capable of launching fighter planes in mid-air. The U.S. military planned to build an entire fleet of them. But those plans ended in disaster. Twice. This is the story of the USS Akron and USS Macon, America's forgotten flying aircraft carriers, and how they vanished into the sea. Birth of a giant. The 1920s and 30s were a time of innovation and ambition. The U.S. Navy was hungry for a new kind of supremacy, one that was not bound to the water, but rather free to roam the skies. Enter the rigid airship. A monster made from aluminum and covered in a silver skin. Powered by engines, held aloft by helium. In 1931, the Navy christened its crown jewel, the USS Akron. At 785 feet long, she was longer than 2 football fields. But this wasn't just an airship. It was a flying aircraft carrier. Inside its hull was a hangar bay, equipped with a revolutionary system. A trapeze that could launch and recover fighter planes mid-air. The F-9C Sparrowhawk biplanes. Small but deadly. Would hook onto the trapeze like birds returning to a nest. Imagine it, aircraft taking off and landing from a flying ship. It was real, it worked, and it was beautiful. But this kind of beauty can be deceiving. The dream takes flight. The USS Akron flew dozens of missions. She dazzled crowds and patrolled U.S. coastlines on reconnaissance runs. Her success sparked a second marvel, the USS Macon. Built in 1933, sleeker, even more refined. Together they were a floating fleet. Aerial eyes of the Navy, tasked with spotting enemy ships over the horizon, and then launching interceptors. The Navy believed these ships could replace entire fleets of scouting vessels. With a range of over 7,000 miles and an onboard squadron of fighters, they could spy deep into enemy territory and then vanish into the clouds. But there was one thing they could never escape: the weather. As massive as these airships were, they were also fragile. The slightest change in weather conditions could spell disaster. An increase in temperature, a gust of wind, a sudden thunderstorm. August 25th, 1927. Lakehurst, New Jersey. The USS Los Angeles does a nose hand. While the USS Los Angeles was the rigid airship the U.S. Navy used to test the trapeze system for launching and recovery of aircraft, it technically was not a flying aircraft carrier. However, nearly as big as the USS Akron and USS Macon, she was just as vulnerable to sudden changes in the weather. While Los Angeles was tethered at the Lakehurst high mast, a gust of wind caught her tail and lifted the airship into the colder, denser air layer sitting just above. This caused the tail to lift even higher. The crew on board tried to compensate by climbing up the keel toward the rising tail. But they could not stop the ship from reaching an angle of 85 degrees before it descended. You can almost imagine the disarray this caused inside the ship. However, no major damage occurred to the airframe, and Los Angeles was able to fly the very next day. February 1932. Lakehurst, New Jersey. Wind blows the USS Akron out of control. Prior to launch, as the USS Akron was brought out from her hangar, a gust of wind blew across the airfield. The tail came loose from her moorings. It was caught by the wind and struck the ground. You can see the crew here desperately releasing water held as ballast. The heaviest damage was confined to the lower fin area, which required extensive repair. May 11th, 1932. San Diego, California. Air temperature causes the USS Akron to suddenly rise. 90 years ago, while trying to dock the flying aircraft carrier USS Akron to her mooring mast, 2 U.S. sailors fell to their death. In 1932, the 785-foot-long airship, USS Akron, flew cross-country from New Jersey to California. Low on fuel, USS Akron was now 36 tons lighter. Also, California sunshine warmed the helium inside, making the carrier dangerously light. Since this particular stop was unplanned, no trained ground handlers or specialized mooring equipment were present, ensuring this was a disaster waiting to happen. To avoid a nose stand like this one by the USS Los Angeles, recorded months earlier, the port mooring cable was cut, and the the USS Akron rose upwards. Most of the ground crew, inexperienced sailors from the Naval Training Station San Diego, released their lines, although 4 did not. This footage, obtained from the U.S. National Archives, shows one sailor letting go at 15 feet, suffering only a broken arm, while 3 other sailors were carried up 360 feet. Aviation Carpenter's Mate 3rd Class Robert Edsel and apprentice seaman Nigel Henton grew tired and let go, plunging to their deaths. However, the 3rd sailor, Seaman Bud Coward, held on for 2 hours at 2,000 feet. While the crew of the USS Akron figured out a way to hoist him aboard the aircraft carrier.
It was a grand and glorious feeling to get inside once more.
April 3rd, 1933. Atlantic City, New Jersey. Disaster in the Atlantic. The USS Akron lifted off from New Jersey for a routine mission. The weather was poor, but not unusual. As night fell over the Atlantic, the skies turned violent. Winds howled. Rain lashed the silver skin. The USS Akron began to descend uncontrollably towards the sea, so the crew immediately released ballast. Then Akron pitched upwards, nose first into the sky. You would think gaining altitude would be a good thing, but it's disastrous for these giants. Airships like this can't operate above 5,000 feet, or they will rise uncontrollably into the thinner air. Battered by wind gusts, the crew was left with no choice but to release thousands of cubic meters of helium, which immediately sealed Akron's fate. At 12:30 a.m., the ship descended uncontrollably and struck the ocean with horrific force. The remaining helium inside kept her afloat for a few minutes. But soon after, she broke apart. Her aluminum skeleton twisted, her lights flickered out, and the sea swallowed her whole. Of the 76 crew aboard, only 3 survived. Among the dead, Rear Admiral William Moffett, a staunch advocate of airship development. His death was a symbolic blow, and a literal one, to the future of flying aircraft carriers. Despite the disaster of the USS Akron, the Navy pressed on with the USS Macon. Based out of Moffett Field, California, she operated mostly along the Pacific coast, training with her Sparrowhawk fighters. Her missions were smoother, calmer. The Navy still believed in flying aircraft carriers. February 12, 1935. Big Sur Coast, California. Disaster in the Pacific. In the 2 years following the disaster of the USS Akron, the USS Macon flew with elegance and precision. But in February 1935, over the Pacific near Point Sur, California, fate repeated itself. A structural failure, possibly from an earlier storm, caused her tail fin to shear off mid-flight. The crew struggled to regain control, but the airship began to lose altitude rapidly. They dumped ballast, released fuel, did everything they could, but they had learned the lessons from the USS Akron. The Macon managed to slow its descent, and unlike the Akron, she didn't crash with brutal force. However, she drifted down. Gently enough, though, that her 83 crew managed to safely abandon ship into the sea. However, 2 still later perished in the ocean. The Macon sank quietly, 1,500 feet below the waves. The last of America's great flying aircraft carriers. With the Akron and Macon lost, the Navy's dream of flying aircraft carriers ended. No more would be built. Airships were deemed too fragile, too vulnerable to weather and to war. And while rigid airships never flew again, non-rigid, lighter-than-air blimps were a valuable part of U.S. anti-submarine patrol efforts of World War II. But the idea of the aircraft carrier itself? Well, as we all know, modern aircraft carriers launch thousands of jets from ocean decks every day. If you enjoyed this exploration into the forgotten aviation history of the U.S. Navy's 2 flying aircraft carriers, then check out this video.